everybody, and welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm super excited what we have to talk about as we move into 2022. I think it's very relevant. And we have three best people to help us get through the topic and bless us with their expertise, knowledge, and insights, okay? So what we're speaking to today is looking beyond the crystal ball, and how to accurately forecast commissions. I think this is a very relevant topic. It can be quite challenging at times. So I'm really excited to learn here, as I haven't had the most experience in this realm. So I can't wait. I'm super stoked. This is going to be great. And I know you guys are here for the insights as well. So again, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us. Without further ado, I want to introduce our three fantastic panelists. So Drew, Mary, and Greg, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to bless us with your knowledge. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So before we go into the first kind of piece of discussion, I'd always like to get a bit more information on each of our panelists, just so we can get a bit more acquainted. Greg, I'll start off with you. Please just give us a bit of background on yourself, who you're all, what you're all about, so we can get to know you a bit better.
Great. Greg Dalgenio. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of a firm called Predictive. We're a NetSuite and Salesforce implementation firm with about 120 employees based in New York City. Prior to that, I worked for Salesforce. So I've had a lot of experience in SaaS as well as with commissions and the whole entire topic and debate here today. So I'm happy to be with you all. What I'm all about is at the moment, it's New York City and large animals and trying to walk my massive dog in the middle of back-to-back calls throughout New York City. I have a 130-pound pit bull. A little fun fact about me. So excited to be with you all today and talk through some of these great topics.
Thank you for joining us, Greg. And wow, 130 pounds. That's a unit.
It's a bit of a unit.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Greg. Really excited to hear what you have to say. And glad to have you. Mary, I'll throw it over to you. Just give us a bit more background on yourself and what you're all about.
Yeah, so first fun fact is Greg's pit bull weighs more than I do, so that's frightening to think about what you are walking out on those streets. So congratulations for being able to control that. I'm Mary Grothe. It's nice to meet you. I'm a former sales rep for a payroll company called Paychecks. I had two different stints there over 8 years, sold in the mid and up market. Had a great career, a lot of sales success. I love the sales profession so much. I started a firm 4 years ago where we were acting as fractional VPs of sales to help small businesses build out that function. About a year and a half in, we started to acknowledge there was quite a bit of difference between those who had a great brand and a good marketing engine versus those who didn't. And so our firm doubled in size and rebranded under this name, House of Revenue. We go on contract for companies typically between 2 and 20 million, give them a fractional revenue team for about 12 to 18 months, rebrand, build a marketing engine, sales CS, and work to scale them. And we have about 22 people or so, Denver based. And I'm excited today to talk about sales comp because this is something I've helped a lot of companies navigate, mostly first by simplifying.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mary. Clearly, you've had a ton of experience. So really excited to get your thoughts on what we're speaking to today. And last but not least, Drew, just give us a bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, so Drew Laxton, I'm the VP of Finance and Analytics at Outreach. I actually started my career as an investment banker, so worked on Wall Street for a bunch of years before transitioning over to software finance about 7-8 years ago now. Took a company public, we went back private, then transitioned over to Outreach about a year and a half ago to build out the finance team and kind of do all the things that we're talking about now. I'm obviously deep in the throes of FY23 planning, which has a lot to do with sales comp, is a big component of that. So excited to talk about it. So Greg, you kind of alluded to it, but the fun fact about me also is with 3 kids and 2 dogs at home, working for a late stage startup is actually my quiet time. So I like it
here. Awesome. Well, Drew, thank you for joining us. Really excited to hear what you have to say around, I know we had a pre-call around the finance aspect of all of this. So this is going to be great. I'm really excited to learn from you guys. And I'm sure the rest of the people on the line here are as well. Okay. So again, thank you three so much for taking the time to join us today. So let's jump into it. Before we go into what we want to get through today, we got a ton of information that we want to speak to. Again, everybody, any questions, Q&A, we want to answer those questions, so throw them in there. But I'm going to run one more poll just to get another kind of sense of the lay of the land here, okay? So in about 2 seconds, you'll see this pop up. But this poll is going to be asking the question of which is your biggest challenge when it comes to commission forecasting. I'm just going to launch it right now. So we've got 4 different ones here. Understanding key cost drivers from prior years, estimating/determining commission cost, dialing in specific rates, thresholds, and performance assumptions when refining the comp plan, and then affirming comp plan design changes. I know there's quite a few there, so just take your time to read through them and give us your insights. I'll leave it up there for about a minute here. Okay. Looks like the specific rates and thresholds are taking the lead here. Okay. I think we've got the majority in here, so I'm going to quickly just end the poll and share the results. So as you can see, 60% dialing in specific rates, thresholds, and performance assumptions when refining the comp plan was our top one. Do any of you have any thoughts on that, or is that what you guys expected as well?
Not what I'd expect. I think there's also, for every incentive, there's also a lot of pitfalls with putting in the wrong decelerators. So I think that's a whole topic unto itself, especially from a finance versus sales perspective, because there's a lot of cost of sale benefits to decelerators, commission floors, things like that, which typically tend to actually give you the wrong behaviors in sales as opposed to what you're going for. So I think there's 2 ends of the coin there for potential landmines that people tend to step on for a first-time sales comp plan designer.
So many salespeople have learned the phrase "break the comp plan." And when you start to look at the accelerators or incentives and the decelerators, they are very smart. And they're going to start to figure out what's in it for them. And going from cost drivers alone and understanding, but then having to put yourself in, how is this going to be received and then acted upon, is a completely other side of the equation that has to be taken into consideration. Especially when you have accelerators and a change over a fiscal year or calendar year, you start to have sandbagging. You have very interesting behaviors that will happen. As much as we love salespeople, I am one, and I've been a part of the community for years. We know how to work the comp plan, and I think that sometimes that can be misconstrued as negative or poor, bad behavior, but that power and control was also put in our hands by putting our earnings in a variable mathematical equation that we can figure out and work to our advantage. And so there are so many things that one answer on that. I agree, Greg. There's 2 sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the best factors we have to try to estimate where the costs of a plan are going to go is history, and in a growth startup like Outreach, or like a lot of the companies that I'm sure you two work with all the time, history is only worth kind of what you take from it. We've grown so much, things have changed. We went through COVID. We're a lot bigger company than we were pre-COVID. How do you ever use that history to predict what the future is going to hold? And then adding to that, we're going to add incentives or take away incentives. How's that going to impact the overall plan and the assumptions? And it's hard to ever get aggressive with any of those when sometimes you need to.
Cool. Love it. Okay. Thanks, guys. Well, okay, so it looks like we're kind of all on the same page here, right? So excited to kind of dive into the specifics, but I'm going to stop sharing here and I'm going to, kick us off, okay? So I want to start off with a question, and Drew, I'll get you to kind of kick it off. So there's tons of different methodologies that you can use for forecasting. What have you guys implemented at Outreach, to help align sales, operations, finance stakeholders, or any kind of data-driven forecasting methodologies that you're using to make sure there's no confusion between different compensation plans? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of that is what you hit on, is that it has to be a team effort. It can't be finance sitting in a hole and coming up and saying that, go into a black box and kick back out a number. It never works very well that way. We try to have a really tight alignment between our RevOps team, the finance team, and the sales leadership, so that we understand as we're pulling a lever how we are saying that impacts the business, and so that we understand what the commission expense construct is going to be, because that eats into budgets, which is part of what we're doing here, as we're trying to forecast the whole business. As I look at it, a lot of what we do is run scenarios, and we try to understand the tension within the comp plan. So, and shout out to my team, because it's not me banging away at the spreadsheets. I've got a great group of guys that are working on this. But the biggest fear that I have as a finance leader is that we could miss our bookings plan but exceed our commissions expense plan, because that's the bad scenario that I don't want to have to go explain to our CFO. So we want to understand what those scenarios are, and if we think they're just complete corner cases or if they're actually possible. So, as I think about it, that's scenario modeling is really the most important thing we do, and on the sales side, that's where the majority of the commissions plans are, and that's where we focus on them.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. I love that. Greg, what are your thoughts on that?
Funny, it's really common actually within sales organizations where the majority of the commission is obviously it's paid out to the highest performing reps, because most companies, especially in software and in services, are going to incentivize overperformance more than disincentivize underperformance, or at least that tends to be the trend, right? I think when you're talking about another thing that really resonated with me, Drew, and Mary, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too, for my own curiosity, is when the teams are working together, there's so many added benefits. One thing that we saw actually internally at Predictive is instead of paying commissions directly on bookings, one change that we made was paying commissions on the deposit or the first ARR payment, right? And that's not really a large delta. Sometimes it delays commission payments for the next pay cycle or whatever it may be. But what it actually does is it turns your sales team into an ally for accounts receivable in a way, right? So that's actually something where, especially in a startup, mind you, we're 120 people, but 6 years ago, we were about 7. So when you start to build a commission plan and you start to really explain to the team, and not only just why we pay what we pay, but really, to your point, Drew, the commercial impact on the business to both finance and sales and operations, they're all marching to the same drum. And it's really important that the teams work together so that sales can get their commission, finance can close out at the right time before the end of the month or shortly thereafter, right? And then you also have operations who's not worried about commission cases and worried about logging all this information. So I think it is, to your point, extremely important that we create transparent, simple commission plans that are easy to forecast and also easy to understand why we get paid what percentage at which tiers and thresholds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mary, I know Greg wanted to get your thoughts. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I love saying that opinions are valuable, but data is priceless. I feel that we have, as already expressed, two sides of the coin. We have two teams that care about this the most: the people earning the money and the company paying out the money, and making sure that it works on both sides. So coming from the world of payroll and HR services, Greg, all of our commission payments were delayed. In fact, we got 0% when we booked the deal. We had to wait 2 months after they started. So in mid-market and upmarket sales, I sold larger engagements. January is a big time to change your payroll provider, or it used to be. Therefore, with large engagements, sometimes they needed 8 to 12 weeks of implementation. So that puts me signing the deal October 1st, which means I'm in contract negotiations in September, which means I booked the discovery call in July. So I am starting the sales process July, August, closing a deal in September, collecting paperwork, onboarding in October. They had to run payroll January, and originally my first stint working for the company, they actually needed 2 full months of billing before they would have an annualized revenue calculation that we were then paid on. Now, the second stint working for that company, they actually shrank that back and they paid in the second month. So they would only look at 1 month of billing. So I came from the world of delayed payments. One of the biggest competitors would offer you 50% of the commission upon booking and then a true up upon that delayed. And that was actually a recruiting mechanism because salespeople would rather have their money now than later. And it was a tactic that actually took a significant amount of those top performing reps for that company to go work for the competition. So when we talk about designing comp plans, there's so much complexity behind it. We have to look at what the organization is trying to achieve. And if those goals are, we want the commission payout to be within the budget. So going back to what Drew was saying, Drew, you're bringing something forth that sounds so simple in nature, but it is so foreign in most companies, is that the finance team would work with sales leadership to truly understand two things, not just commission, but quotas. And looking at that, so we've partnered with organizations where every salesperson has the same quota. It's a big miss, in my opinion, because not all territories or segments or responsibilities or verticals or whatever their responsibilities, they're not all made equal. And so we would want to look at what is the value of the territory or the segment or the responsibility, and what is the value of that, and then what is the percentage that we believe that the salesperson should be able to obtain, and then even taking into consideration things like tenure, ramp time, start date with the company, and ability to accomplish that. Then based on that and knowing scientifically proven what the quota should be, what are we willing as an organization to pay to acquire those customers, and also brought up earlier, to retain. So we get into retention dollars, which is a totally other part of this conversation and not net new business. So Drew, just coming forward and saying it has to be in partnership is a substantial win anytime a corporation is acknowledging that and getting scientific. Greg, on your side, there's an interesting component of how do we attract and retain the right sales talent, but honor what needs to be done for the company. And I think it varies by stage of company. Some corporations might be able, especially in hyper growth stages or when they're funded, might be able to pay some of that on bookings, but also create some of that behavior for retention. So we have the ally to accounts receivable, but also the ally to implementation team and customer onboarding. And then looking at retention dollars is a completely other facet of this. So to both of your points, I think it just further augments the case that we have to have alignment with everybody involved, and also have to understand what does the salesperson want. If they've ever had a choice of where they work, it's right now.
Mm-hmm.
I actually loved the sentiment around using it as a retention method, and maybe just to be a bit provocative, maybe to any sales leader in the room, and certainly to any finance leader in the room. It's interesting. I actually, to plug another Sales Hacker article, I wrote an article for Sales Hacker called "The Difference Between a CRO and a VP Sales," and one of them, among many, was a CRO has to have a finance and really an investor mindset. To Mary's point earlier, if you have a rep who's got North Dakota versus a rep who has Colorado, right? The year-over-year growth percentage for both may be the same target, but the bookings value is going to be very different on both of those territories. A lot of sales comp plans would have both of those sales reps at the same base and OTE. And the problem with that is, much like an investor in, the public stock markets, if you're evaluating a company, you should be prepared to pay a premium for growth in more difficult areas, right? If you have two companies and they're exactly the same, one of them is growing faster than the other one, you'll pay a premium, right? It's kind of the inverse in sales, where if you have North Dakota versus Colorado and you want to achieve the same level of growth for North Dakota as Colorado, you have to pay a higher commission cost of sale on the slower growth territory or the more difficult territory as an investment in growing that territory, so that that rep doesn't get disincentivized and leave the business. And that's something that's really difficult for a lot of organizations to understand. But when you break it down for finance like an investment, which is truly what it is in the growth of the company, you have the ability to have that more informed conversation.
And actually, to make it something even more tangible than Colorado versus North Dakota, we think about it a lot in that our sales force is split between people going and getting new logos versus people who are retaining and expanding our existing customers. And this sort of leads to the next question, but we do look at that commission rate that you're talking about, and I'm willing to pay a higher commission rate on that new logo dollar versus an expansion dollar that's a little bit easier to capture and a little bit more quantifiable as well.
Yeah. I just have a quick, a really quick question that I want to kind of get your thoughts on, right? Going back to Mary, what you mentioned about, retention and so on. And what you said now is kind of the almost an employee market rather than employer, right? So there's this notion of the great resignation that's happening right now. How important is compensation plans and keeping retention, and towards that, that whole idea, especially right now, how important is it to have, the right plans in place to make sure that, people aren't jumping ship? Mary, what do you think?
It's incredibly important. And it's not in lieu of the other things that are being requested by employees. It is thought by some of the executives that we work with that, well, then if they're going to get this, then they go without something else. And it's not how it's working right now. They want hybrid or work from home. They want whatever hours best suit their lifestyle, whether they're caring for a child or need to take their dog for a walk or for the causes that they care about or whatever it is. They need mental health days. They need quota relief to actually take a vacation. They need things that are now so exciting to see in news feeds of employers who are truly pushing the envelope to try to create comp packages that are unbelievable and they're highly attractive. They want a high base salary. They don't want to take the risk anymore. I think last year we all saw what happened when people take the risk and salespeople take the risk and these low base salaries and low guaranteed and these catastrophic events happen in our world. Well, that significantly harmed pay. It shook a lot of people. They want a high base salary. They want to know that they're being invested in and taken care of. Now we're seeing a shift where we used to see maybe a decade ago and before someone willing to take a more aggressive comp plan. I'll take the lower base because I want a high payout. That was me. I took a $40,000 base with a payroll company, but was earning several $100,000 a year. But after taxes, I'm like, did I even get a salary check? I don't know, but I was crushing it on commissions. But now the wave that I'm seeing is that temperament is gone. People want the base and they want the earning potential, but they also want all of those other components. So ways that we've noticed that we can avoid some of the challenges with the Great Resignation, I look at a compensation plan and I love other milestones that are used for retention. For example, milestone earnings. What if you had a lifetime sales tracker and for every million that you sell with the company, you get a $5,000 bonus and maybe your quota is only $300,000 a year. So you look at that and say, this is our way to potentially retain somebody for 3.5 years. That's an average how long it takes to sell a million. Potentially they get an award, they get recognition, they get a different badge on their Zoom background, something for their LinkedIn profile, and then they're going to get a fat bonus. Is that a retention mechanism that we can put in place? Yes. Those are things that you could work towards, and having different levels of earning, maybe like a club, or can move your way up outside of the traditional things that we've seen. Also, there's other opportunities. People want not just compensation, they want days off. They want to take a lead in a team meeting. They want to be in charge. They want authority. They want things that make them feel empowered and important. That's this generation that we really need to lean into because they are our future of our sales organizations. I think they want to be taken care of and acknowledged, valued, heard a little bit differently than the sales reps of yesteryear.
Yeah, love it. Thanks for that, Mary. And I kind of went through a very similar situation recently, so I totally kind of can relate and understand. So awesome. Okay, moving on. We want to talk about the commission cost of sales, but before I dive into that, just for all those that are in the room that might not be familiar with that term, Mary, I'm going to throw it over to you to just kind of give us a breakdown of what the commission cost of sales means essentially before we dive into the next topic.
Sure. At the most simplistic view, a commission would be earning compensation specifically tied to a sale. Now, it can be calculated in a multitude of ways. Some commission could be a percentage based on top line revenue. So if the contract value was $100,000, I could get 2% of that amount paid out. Other calculations could be tied to gross margin or profit or net profit. And so it could be a different calculation. Sometimes it's a flat fee, sometimes it's a percentage, sometimes it's paid within a recurring payroll cycle, sometimes it's monthly or quarterly, biannually, annually. And so comp plans can be constructed from a multitude of ways, but in the simplistic form, commission would simply just be defined as I sold something and my company gave me some money for selling that.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you, Mary. And I know we briefly touched on it in our pre-call, but Drew, did you want to add anything to that on the kind of the more financial side of the term?
Yeah, and so we look at this in a couple different ways from a finance lens. One is I flip it around, so we're paying dollars for ARR that is booked. Which I think is a pretty standard practice within software in general. And I flip the math around to look at it on a rates basis. What percent of the deal am I paying out in commissions? And that actually, I worry the most about having the sales reps, the first line sales reps, being paid correctly, and that there's some equity among them. That I can't have somebody making 20% on a dollar and another person making 8 cents on it, or 8% on a dollar. It just doesn't work, and frankly, people figure it out if it's structured that way. But we also look at it all rolled up, because sales managers or RVPs get paid also for the deals that come in. And so I look towards at the end of each quarter or the end of each period at what total percent did we pay in variable commissions on the ARR bookings that we brought in. And that also goes down to what we renewed, what services we paid, so that I understand for the business that's walking in the door, what am I paying to acquire that? And a lot of people have heard the term CAC, or customer acquisition cost. This is a major component of customer acquisition cost, and it's one of the very important things that especially growth software companies are looking at.
Awesome.
Something that you highlighted there, Drew, and maybe just to put a highlighter on it, the commission cost of sale, it's really easy to misinterpret that as what the account executive earns on the deal that's booked. But something that you hinted at is really, you have to think about everyone who earns a percentage of an opportunity, or a percentage of a total revenue value, or bookings value, or milestone value. And that would obviously include the account executive, but also it may include any co-prime salespeople within the organization. It could include the leadership chain, right? You have your RVP and your manager and your regional manager, and then your area manager, and then your director. Right? And then you also have to think about the business development or sales development rep. Do they get a kicker on a deal that gets booked? Do they get a kicker on the meeting that was set for the deal that closed, right? So once you have all of those numbers, that's really your full weighted commission cost of sale that goes into the CAC calculation. It goes into your cost to acquire a customer. Again, it goes into all of those different metrics that you have to then forecast. And then when that deal comes in, if that, commission, total weighted commission value is 10%, then when you book a $100,000 deal, right, you're taking $10,000 right off of the top of that deal, and accruing that on your balance sheet, because you're going to have to pay that out, whether it's now or over the course of the delivery of the deal. And you actually brought up before the call, maybe to kick it back to you, do you account that differently? Let's say I'm sorry, this is going to sound like a test, Drew. Sorry. It's a $100,000 deal. What's the difference if it's all SaaS versus it's $100,000 and 50 of it is services or products and 50 of it is actual software? Do you treat that differently?
Certainly, those are treated differently. So, the test was the life of commissions under ASC 606. So, without getting too nerdy on this, there was an accounting pronouncement that basically made it so we have to treat commissions different than just expensing them all in the quarter where they're paid out. And so, if a sales rep earns $1 of commissions, we're going to pay them that $1 based on their comp plan. But we actually have to accrue that $1 on our balance sheet and amortize it over a life that is determined by accountants, honestly. And one of the worst experiences of my life, honestly, was helping a company transition to ASC 606 and figuring out how we were going to accrue and amortize that over the life. But you're right, services are done differently because those are billed and expensed in quarter. They don't chase the life of the deal, where software, you have a lifetime value to it. So there is a difference between the cash and the accounting accrual expense. We try to focus on the cash basis, though, because in the end, that's what really matters here, is cash in the door and cash back out the door, and understanding the rates that we're paying there. It just makes it really fun and painful to project your financials in a year or 2 years as you amortize all of those commissions.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew. And I want to throw it back over to Mary. How, around the commission cost of sales, how do you actually portray that to, how it correlates back to profit?
I think Greg's expansion of the definition was quite brilliant. Now I need to read your article because that was a very good answer. When we look at how this relates to profit, I would just, without being redundant, bring forth what Greg and Drew just said. It is a calculation that you have to take into consideration for everybody that's getting paid on that deal, and over what period of time. So when you're looking at profit, you have two ways that you can look at it. If you're trying to just look at a regular calculation, as it was just stated, when it's all said and done, $100,000 contract, when everybody gets paid, all said and done, it's 10% of that cost. But if you're actually trying to build a model, a revenue model, or like a pro forma to say, let's say we just secured investment, we're going to go up in headcount. So now we're layering this out all the way across the months. For every dollar in, this is what's coming out, and you're going to have it flow through to the bottom. So how does it impact profit? Well, the most simple calculation is going to be, what did we bring in? What is the total client acquisition cost less other expenses? And then there you go. But you can get so complex in a true revenue model when trying to determine this. And I don't want to make it overly complex here, but there is a download on our website. It's a SaaS economics, revenue economics template, and it allows you to build this model where you're able to put in, if we're bringing in all this overhead with salespeople, sales development, managers, and whatnot, what is the marketing cost, the client acquisition cost? It calculates it all. It shows you the burn. You can put in what your retention rate is with clients, and you can get that calculation. But this is the reason why the Drews of the world exist, and why the companies that are growing and scaling have to take this into consideration, because it's not as simple as the compliment that you hand the sales rep that they sign across their first day coming on board. To truly be able to capture this and understand how it's going to impact the organization long term, you have to have that full snapshot. So I don't know if I did your question any justice here with the answer. I just wasn't feeling confident I needed to add much more than what Greg and Drew said, other than you have a very simple way to look at it is a summary of 100,000, we paid 10%. So there you go. There's a gross profit on that. But it's depending on what you're trying to determine the profit amount for, that's not really a great answer, because you have to look at all the other variables and figure out, why are you looking at the profit? To determine when you go up in headcount? Are you reporting to investors? What are you trying to do here? Because there's just so much more that goes into that calculation to determine the net profit on that sales team or sales function, not just the team.
Yeah. Awesome.
I may have made it worse. I don't know. You might be regretting bringing that to me.
No, I love it. I get all the different aspects and, much more thorough kind of idea. It's fantastic. I'm learning a ton here. So, the more the merrier. Awesome, guys. Okay, well, we're going to move on to the next kind of topic here. But before we do that, I want to launch another quick poll here. So everyone on the line, you'll see it in front of you quickly. And this one's going to be about, when are new commission plans rolled out? Or when should they be, per se? So at the beginning of the new year, after the new year, whenever we have it ready. What do you guys think? What do you, Drew, I'll send it over to you. What do you think is going to be the outcome here?
Well, it depends on if the question is, when are they, or when do you want them to be? Because if you want them to be, or should they be, it'll be before the rollover of the year. When are they, I would bet, is after the start of the new year, sometime before the end of the first quarter for most people.
Got it. It's, you're looking like you're on the right track there.
Oh, There's so many
well,
chuckles in response to that. I just feel like we have all lived it. Yes. Why is it always after the fact?
I'll say this for any finance people that are listening, and actually for all sales people that are listening, it's really hard to get commission plans rolled out. There is a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of times that you get towards the end and realize, oh, I didn't think about that scenario, or I didn't look at that in the right way, or what would that have been if we did it last year? And it sends everybody back to the drawing board. And so it's, even though it looks like there are small changes, it is sometimes very daunting to get out.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, cool. I'm just going to end it here. Share the results quickly. And as you can see, when our new commission plan rolled out, beginning of the new year. It's pretty much exactly what you expected, Drew. So no surprises there. Cool. I'm just going to stop sharing here and we'll jump right into the next one. Okay. So to kind of add on to that and rolling out, new commission plans and design changes, there are a lot of moving parts with these, design changes and rolling them out. So what insights or what metrics do you, lean on or utilize to, make sense of all the moving parts in order to make these changes successful moving forward for the long term? Greg, I'll start with you there.
So if there's any services businesses on the phone, this will be very specific to our industry, but also could be any software company that sells services. There is a difference between bookings and revenue in every company, but specifically with any company that provides a service. And it could be anything as a service, whether it's software, whether it's moving, or whatever the case may be. So at the end of the year, as a sales leader, it might be easy to go through all of your Salesforce opportunities and do year-to-date closed. That was our revenue. Great. But that's actually not your company's revenue by definition. Actually, that's your bookings, and your revenue is usually held in your ERP, which is something that your finance team is going to look at day in and day out, because the revenue, by the legal definition or by the accounting definition, is really going to be that cash that you received and what you recognized. So from that standpoint, if you run that report based on what you paid as a percentage of revenue, it might tell a different story than what you paid as a percentage of bookings. And it also works the opposite way, where let's say you booked $1 million of new business, but your services team delivered $4 million of existing business based on them billing their rate to a client, right? Actually, what happened there is you paid a much lower rate if you look at commissions paid out versus revenue booked. So you have to first identify what report you're really looking at. Are you looking at your commission as a percentage of revenue or commission as a percentage of bookings? Because those are going to tell two different stories. But once you have the right data set, which if you don't know where to find it, ping your local VP of finance. But once you have the right data set that you know what you're looking at, then you should think about, is this something that is, when put into the overall picture of your cost to acquire a customer, or frankly, your cost of sale, which is different than simply commission, is that something our organization can scale on? Is it too heavy? Is it something we could afford to pay more of to be more competitive in the marketplace, sourcing talent away from, these SaaS behemoths, right, who are always searching for talent in the same pools we are? So I think the summarization there is really make sure you're looking at the right data and make sure that when you're calculating cost of sale, you're not using bookings versus actual revenue in.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. I'll toss it over to Drew. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so as we think about rolling out comp plans, I principally don't like changing comp plans during a fiscal year. So I try my hardest to have it only once a year if we're going to make changes. And I think probably like most finance teams, we just have a Google sheet that's going all year long on this worked, this didn't work. Let's talk about this as we go through commission planning next year. It's really easy to look at something and say, there are 30 things we need to change, but I do have a strong principle that we need to step back and say, does this still make sense? Because there could be a bunch of levers that you're pulling, and the reality is there's only 2 or 3 things that need to change, because the one thing I don't want to do is, and Mary, you alluded to this earlier, I don't want the sales team to spend a quarter to figure out their sales plan, their comp plans. And they will do that if you change too much and things get overly complex. I want the sales team selling, because that's where I more than anything else. And so I try to keep a principle of simplicity as much as possible in the comp plans. It also makes it easier for us to forecast the plans if they're easier and more straightforward. If you have a bunch of kickers and levers and things that are in there, trying to figure out the number of times an individual rep's going to land a deal over 100K is so hard to forecast and figure out. So why put it in? We know they're going to push hard on deals. Now, if there's specific things I want to incentivize, like getting new logos, like that's a good thing to put in plans. But if it's something that's around the edges, I try to stay away from it.
Got it. Mary, what do you think?
I am going to insert a question. I hope this is allowed.
Please.
Based on everything that we've been talking about to this point, I know there is a trend emerging for commissionless comp plans. Drew, what would you think about an organization looking at historical information and being able to look at the average of what was paid out on bookings per rep at quota or at a certain level, and just making the comp plan a flat base salary with no variable, and tying performance expectations not to variable comp, but simply just to retaining their job, and removing the complexity, simplifying it completely all the way up to senior management or even executive level. And any type of variable comp potentially is tied to a team goal for all revenue departments of hitting a net new logo and hitting a retention marker, and potentially it's paid twice annually or once a quarter, and it's just a share of the team based on achieving a company goal. I'm just hearing so much that we've all lived through with complexity and dealing with this and changes and inability to handle it, and we're looking at this great resignation. We're looking at attracting people to sell. They want higher base. They want less risk. What are your thoughts on throwing this all out the window and just saying, based on historical data, this is the amount? If your territory is worth this, we're going to ask you to sell 500,000, and to do that, you're going to make $212,000. You're paid it. We're going to give you all these resources and accountability and expectations to hit it. If you are not tracking or pacing or whatever, this is your warning performance improvement plan. And if you don't hit this or achieve this or quarterly metric or whatever, you're out. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm too old school to be able to pull that off and actually put something like that, or to try something like that. If a company is doing this and doing it successfully, I'd love to read the case study, because that does sound interesting. But my fear of that is that it would take our sellers that are going after $1 million commission check and have a shot at it and have them walk out the door on us. And I worry that you would lose some of that talent. I think on average, your productivity might go up because you do reduce the stress of hitting my quarterly number and hitting all of those pieces. But I do worry that your most talented sales reps would end up leaving because of that. The other piece of that is, outreach. We are very early in markets outside of the United States. How do I set that quota? Or how do I set that target on going into a new market? I think a more mature company could probably pull that off easier than we could, because the historical data is lumpy at best.
I have to comment on what you said really fast. Just what was present for me is, in most organizations, how many of those salespeople that you described that you would be fearful of losing do they actually have? Do they have one? Do they have two? Do they employ a sales staff of 20 that they want to be like their top 1 or 2 reps that they would be fearful of losing? That if they leveled the playing field and did bring in something that brought forth more efficiency and productivity and less stress and better focus on the role, mental health, and the resources, and like really going about the role, is it worth it to lose two top producers to potentially get 14 out of 20 or 12 out of 20 performing when maybe they aren't? And that's a rhetorical question. It just made it, that's what was present for me, and thinking, how hard do organizations fight to get 80 to 90% of their sales force to act like the top 2 to 10%? And those numbers didn't line up, so top 1 to 20%, right? How hard do they fight to try to get that, versus just meeting where the middle is and getting performance that's more predictable, easier to obtain, and building plans around that? And I don't know I don't know the answer. This is very rhetorical, but that's what was present for me. But Drew, you can respond, or Greg. I know I interrupted too, so I'll let you hop in.
No, I think I have two perspectives on this. My perspective is as a career salesperson, as a sales leader, a CRO, but also as someone who's had to make payroll in really tough times. So there's a couple of ways to look at this. And one example is definitely the one that Drew pointed out. If we go back to Drew's investment banking days and we say, hey, every managing director is going to just get an annual $6 million, and it doesn't matter, no more base and bonus, the bank would go under. We'd have another really bad scenario. The challenge that I see with that example is your top reps will earn in multiples of 3, 4, and above X of their base salary or of their OTE as a whole. And those are the reps who they don't care about their base salary in most of the settings, right? You mentioned that when you were at your first role, or the first role you mentioned on the call at least, you didn't even realize, did I get a base check? And I would probably make the argument that I want a sales team full of entry-level sales career Marys. She's who I want on my sales team. She's who I look for in interviews. And what incentivizes her is usually not going to be, a high base. Let's say if you're offering either 75 or 150, right? And that's base versus commission versus just that one lump example. I would venture to guess that Mary would come in and see that OTE, as long as she agrees it's attainable, and say, how far beyond that can I go? Right? And how could I turn that 150 to a 250 to a 320, right? And above, if you're selling an enterprise or whatever the case may be. So that's one angle. The second angle is in a down month, in a down quarter, in an April 2020. I don't want to bring anybody back there, but just for a moment, those of us in leadership and finance, that was a very real conversation, is what happens if our top 10 customers stop paying our bills, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have this massive payroll associated with cost of sale, and you're not, a behemoth company like an IBM or something like that, that could be a very difficult pill to swallow. And what becomes more incumbent on you as, a steward of capital and everyone's job, is essentially to pay for performance when performance occurs, as opposed to paying for potential prospect of future performance based on your trust in the employee. And you should instill a great working environment. For example, you should still have trust in your manager, a large swath of responsibilities that the person can take and learn from, and learning and development that makes them feel great at work. You should always offer those things. But offering everyone on the team a much, much higher base than industry could be detrimental when times aren't as great as they are now.
Oh, I completely agree. I asked the question for fun, for conversation, and I've seen posts about it of removing commission, and we've had clients ask us what our thoughts are on it. Just for the record, we've not implemented that with any client, just so we're all aware. And I think, Greg, in your example, when times are drastic, I mean, ultimately, if those salespeople are making a base that they can not live off of anyway, you're going to run into the exact same outcome, because you're going to be losing people. But if you have people that are high base, and we have another event like that, that's why so many corporations did the layoffs they needed to, or they simply cut payroll and say, because of this situation and customers not paying, like, we're going 50 on payroll. Like, we have to cut it in half, and we understand if this means you can't retain a position here. But I think you get the same outcome regardless of what to do in that scenario. But I thought it was good for conversation. I've seen it pop up. I've been asked the questions. So I was curious what you all thought.
Yeah. So one thing to ladder on there, a point I want to make sure I get out is, sales comp is very visible within the company, and it's one of the bigger concerns that I always have is you get blowback from the engineering team that's building the product that's being sold, or as sales reps are going to club, and engineers or product leaders or services teams, like, people see it and understand it. And the reality is, like, I appreciate that sales is very, very hard, and it's the way that those teams are incentivized to get there. I worry about anything that looks like you're pushing more comp towards the sales rep for not actually delivering something specific. They start to look like the average employee all of a sudden, and then the average employee starts questioning the compensation practices there. And without knowing the specific numbers, it's just such a visible thing around the company. And it's something that I try to manage as best I can as we're going through planning, especially.
Love it. Awesome. Well, Mary, thank you. That was awesome. I do want to touch on one quick point before we let everybody go. But it actually kind of ties in with a question that we just got from the audience. So commission plans, they can be quite dynamic, right? And they can continuously change. How have you been able to forecast for those continuous changes over the year? And to kind of follow into the question from the audience, what are your thoughts on how often you should be adjusting quotas? Why don't we start with you, Greg?
So adjusting quotas really should happen no more than once a year.
Sure.
That is the best and fastest way to demotivate a sales rep, especially one who's performing. The best sales reps on any team I've been a part of, when they found out their quota, they had an amount of leads they would need to convert and what their average close rate was, their average ticket. They did all the calculations and they broke that down into a number. And this is how many I need to convert every week, month, depending on whether you're SMB, mid-market, enterprise, whatever you work in. Don't do that if at all possible. But as far as changing comp plans, there will always be edge cases. Drew mentioned this earlier. I think Mary, you actually might have touched on this earlier too, but there will always be edge cases, and be afraid to not make comp plans for the exceptions to the rules that are very few and far between, because that will be viewed by your organization as an overcorrection and could actually lose you credibility. So if you are thinking of making changes to a rep's annual quota, ensure that it happens when you deliver the comp plan for the new fiscal year, and make sure that their path to quota is described to them. And if it's a large jump in quota, you'll also probably want to take a better, deeper look at their OTE and their base to make sure that they feel adequately incentivized.
Mm-hmm. Drew, Mary, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I would agree to do it once a year. And to support Greg, you have to make any changes scientifically proven. I think what's very frustrating to salespeople and sales leadership are arbitrary numbers that are pulled out of the sky. And like 20% year over year growth. Why does that sound like such an attractive number that so many people just set? Like, we're going to go 20%. Why? And I think that it is so important that anytime you're making a change, is you can trace it back to something very specific. And then anything that you can do that's specific to the sales team or person's responsibility, geographic, territory, vertical, product segment, whatever it is, that will help. We had our quota changed a lot. We had a lot of changes with pass-through and referral percentage and kickbacks and to different divisions within the company. And so for us, anytime there was a change, as long as it made sense, I think we were okay with it. It's when something didn't add up and the salespeople then would band together in the teams and the management, and it was a war, and it was against the others. And I think that that's where you create the unrest that's completely unnecessary. Money is very personal. It should be treated like math and science. Unfortunately, as humans, we tend to treat it emotionally. And so when you're making those changes, you just need to be able to explain it and remove a lot of that friction.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, we only have a couple minutes left. I'm sure you guys are all very busy and might have to hop off to a meeting right after this. So I'm going to put 2 minutes back into you guys' calendar. And thank you, Mary, Greg, and Drew, for taking the time today to share your knowledge and expertise in this topic. I learned so much. So thank you so much from myself. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the rest of the audience does too. So thank you, Captivate IQ, for sponsoring this webinar. Go check them out. They're doing some awesome stuff in this realm. And if you have any other additional questions for Mary, Greg, or Drew, please go find them on LinkedIn. Send them a connection. Ask them some questions. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer those there. So again, thank you three so much for taking the time. We really, really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to do it again soon sometime.